Hello and welcome, friends. Today we are now basically moving on to the next module, which is the questionnaire design. Up till now, we have had a discussion on the basic theory of research process, and we have also discussed the research designs, various types, and various data collection methods. And we also have discussed the different types of sampling methods that are available to you. Now we are moving on to questionnaire design. You would remember that. The questionnaires are basically used as a data collection tool in surveys. Okay, and since most of the time students at your level they have to conduct surveys because observations are relatively difficult and more subjective, while experiments are very difficult to conduct because of the various extraneous influences, extraneous factors, extraneous variables. So generally students go for surveys, and generally students also undertake descriptive researches, and that is why questionnaire design becomes a very important skill for students at your level. So that is why questionnaire design has been given as a separate module also. So should we start? Okay, now before moving on to the design part, we need to understand what questionnaire is. So questionnaire is nothing but it is a set of questions, it is a list of questions. Many times these questions are also termed as items. So the questions can also be said to be items. So a questionnaire now becomes a list of questions or a list of items. What are items? Items are nothing but the questions only. Many times you might use these terms also, and in many places you would be uh, coming across this particular term, items. So questionnaire is a set of questions or a set of items which has been designed to generate data necessary for accomplishing research objectives. So basically you are collecting the data so that you can achieve whatever you have set out to find in your research, or whatever research objectives you have set for yourself. You want to be able to accomplish those objectives, and that is why you need to collect data. And questionnaire is basically a list of questions or a list of items which will help you collect that data. Questionnaires are basically administered with, now please be very sure, please bear in mind this particular terminology, administered with respondents. So basically I'm sorry, to respondents. So questionnaires are administered to respondents. What does this mean? This basically means that the questionnaire seeks to collect data from the respondents. The wordings are standardized, as well as the sequence of questions. Both of them, they are standardized. What do we mean by standardized? Standardized means one particular format. So the wordings, how the questions have been worded, and what is the sequence of the question, that is only available in just one type. There are not, across different questionnaires you would not have different sequence or different types of questions or different type of wordings. For all the questionnaires the sequence would be the same and the wordings would be standardized. And this is very important. If the wordings are not standardized, which means the wordings are not same in different questionnaires which are being administered to different respondents, there might be some errors that might creep in your research. So the wordings have to be standardized, and the questions, their sequence also will be standardized in a questionnaire. You have to ensure that the questionnaire is neither too short nor too long, because if it is too short then you may not get adequate information from the respondent. On the other hand, if it is too long, many times the respondent would leave the questionnaire half filled only, or would right in the beginning decline your request of answering the questions. So it should not be too long also. You would remember that we had talked about the non-response bias. So if the questionnaire is too long, you might have to face this particular error, and this error is the non-response, because the respondents would simply deny your request of filling up the questionnaire. So this is something that has to be taken care of. And in the for the same reason, the questionnaire has to be very, very interesting also, so that the respondent is motivated to complete the questionnaire. He's motivated not to leave the questionnaire only half filled. That is why you have to make the questionnaire a little interesting also. So you can use cartoons also for this particular purpose. You can use pictures and good formats for this purpose. When you are administering questionnaire to some illiterates, in fact, you don't administer questionnaires to illiterates. These are basically schedules. So basically, if you are administering a questionnaire to somebody who's not that well educated, he is not a elite, who is not, that person may not be an illiterate, that person is literate but he is not very well educated, he may not be able to comprehend all your questions. So there, in such cases, or for example, if you are administering the questionnaire with some children, it would be better idea to make use of visuals, photographs, illustrations, cartoons, smileys. This will help the respondent, the children or people who are less educated, comprehend the meaning of your question and give the responses which are more accurate. So rather than making use of text, you may make use of visuals. For example, cartoons can be made use of. For example, whenever you go for research in rural markets, what do? In rural markets, happiness and satisfaction many times is linked up with green color, greenery, because greenery would mean that there is a good crop, and the farmer would be able to sell it in the market, and they would be able to earn a lot of money for their hard work. So for them, the green color is correlated with the satisfaction, feeling of satisfaction or feeling of happiness. On the other hand, the brown color would mean that the crop has been damaged either due to rainfall or maybe because of some other natural reason. And for them, that is why the brown color is is a symbol of sorrow, right? So if I want to find out whether my farmers in the rural markets, they are satisfied with the product or not, so rather than giving them the response choices like this, ki how satisfied you are, very satisfied, not at all satisfied, I would do what, I would show a green color at one extreme and brown color at the other extreme, and in the interim, in between the two extremes, you would have a mix of green and brown color. So if his response is the fully green picture, means he is satisfied, and if his response is the picture which has all brown color about it, then it means he is not satisfied. So this way I can make the questionnaire more comprehensible to people who are less educated. Likewise, you can make use of smileys when you are administering questionnaire to children. Now let us talk about the two response formats which are generally used in the questionnaire. The one is called the open-ended and the other one is the closed-ended. So there are basically two types of questions. One is the open-ended, the other one is closed-ended. Now let us understand what do we mean by this. Now this is an example of open-ended question, and the response will be open-ended, and that is why this is called an open-ended question. What is your opinion about healing ability of Dettol? So the respondent will have to answer in his own words, and different respondents will answer this question in n different manners, in n different ways. So if you are administering this question to, let's say, 200 different respondents, all 200 respondents would be answering this question in different ways, because there is no particular set answer to this particular question. So they have the freedom of answering in whatever manner they like, and this is one peculiar attribute of an open-ended question. Respondent is replying in his own words. But then why is it important? It is important because it provides richer information. It will give you more information just because the respondent is answering in his own words. He's actually writing down what he thinks. He's not being limited by some of the options that you have given them, that you have given him, which will happen with the closed-ended question. In closed-ended question, you would be only giving the respondent some options, 4 options, 5 options, 7 options at max. So his answers would be limited to those 7 options. But in open-ended questions, that is not the case. He can answer in whatever manner he feels like. So that is why such open-ended questions are going to give you richer piece of information. Because again, another reason is respondent shall be using real world terminology. He'll be writing down what he actually feels, and he'll be using the terminology that he actually use in his day-to-day life, and that is why he would be using the real world terminology. These are easy to design. Why are they easy to design? The reason is very simple. You don't have to give the choices. You don't have to spend time on thinking about the response choices. We do not need to give the response choices to the respondent in open-ended questions. So that is why you will be finding it easy as a researcher to design open-ended questions. But then the problem with these kind of formats is they are difficult to analyze. You simply cannot analyze these kind of questions on an Excel sheet. How can you analyze that? Because 200 different respondents have given you 200 different responses. It's very difficult for you to analyze it using the various analytical tools that you have, maybe the Excel sheet or maybe some other software packages like SPSS. Very difficult to analyze such responses. Analyze responses given to open-ended questions, and that is one drawback of open-ended questions. Again, one more lacuna with these kind of questions is that the non-response error is high. Since the respondent has to write down in his own words, the respondent is likely not to feel like exerting this kind of an effort, and he would simply leave the question only half answered, or he would simply leave the question without writing down anything. That is why we are saying that the non-response errors would be high in such kind of questions. Another problem with these kind of questions would be that they are biased towards articulate respondents. What do we mean by this? Articulate means one who can express himself better. So if the respondent is able to express himself well, he can provide you answer to these kind of questions. But on the other hand, there are people who may not be able to express themselves well. Maybe they might not be so proficient in the particular language in which the questionnaire has been designed, or it may so happen that they're not highly educated, they are only functionally literate. So they may find it very difficult to provide you an answer to this question. So these kind of questions are biased towards articulate respondents, those who are able to express their views without any inhibition and in a very nice manner. So these three are the drawbacks with open-ended questions. Now let us discuss other type of the other type of response formats, the close-ended questions. Now why do we call them close-ended? Because see, in this particular question, this is an example. The response choices, the options, response categories are limited in number. That is why they are called closed-ended questions. The respondent has to mark one of these 4 choices that he's been given: excellent, very good, average, or poor. He cannot go beyond these choices to write down whatever he wants, which was the case with the open-ended questions. So that is why these are called closed-ended questions. But then they have their own advantages, they have their own pros and cons. uh, what happens, as I've already said, that the response categories or the options are given for the respondents to choose from. So they can easily choose one of these response categories. This is going to be a conducive way of designing the questions when the response ranges are limited. When the limited range of possible response is there can be limited number of responses which are possible. When there are great number of possible responses, then you should go for the open-ended questions. But then when there are limited range of possible responses, then you should go for closed-ended question. For example, if I ask you do you like Parleji or not? There are only two responses that you can give, yes or no. Or maybe a third response can be slightly neither yes or not nor no, but slightly. So this could be so there are limited number of responses that are possible. In such case, you go for closed-ended question. But then if I have to ask you, what do you feel would be the impact of lockdown on the economy? Then there are n number of responses which are possible, and for these kind of questions, when the response range is unlimited, you should go for open-ended questions. Now, what is the problem with closed-ended questions? They are difficult to design. So the advantages are exactly opposite of what we saw in the open-ended questions. They are difficult to design. Why the open-ended were easier to design? Because you didn't have to decide what response categories you are going to provide to your respondent. But here you have to decide as to what response categories you have to provide to your respondent. For example, here we see four response categories: excellent, very good, average, and poor. So this has to be designed. So apart from designing the question, you also have to design the response categories, and that is why they are going to be more difficult to design, and they are going to consume more time in designing. But the analysis is going to be easier. So the advantage is that the analysis is going to be easier. Why? Because you suppose you have collected response from 200 odd respondents, you can easily find out how many of them have said excellent, how many of them said very good, how many of them responded poor, or how many of them said average. So this you can easily calculate, analyze using various software packages or various analytical tools. So the advantage with closed-ended questions are they are easier to analyze. But then there is a problem, and the problem is that there would be position bias. What do we mean by position bias? It is the tendency of the respondent to choose from the first or the last alternative. So many times it may so happen that the respondent does not have much time, or he's simply not willing to exert mental efforts to think about the question that you've asked and to answer that particular question. So what we'll do, he will keep on ticking the first response category in all the questions. So for all the questions, he'll keep ticking the first response category. The response category can be anything, but he'll keep on ticking because he does not want to exert his mental energy. He does not want to spend his mental energy, does not want to exert his mental effort. So what I either he'll keep on ticking the first one, all the first options in all the questions, or he'll keep on ticking the last options in all the questions. And this basically would mean that I am not getting the response which is closer to reality, and this is called the position bias. And now this position bias is going to impact the data collection when you are using the closed-ended questions, but this cannot happen with the open-ended questions. But the advantage is it is less taxing for respondents. Less taxing means it requires the respondents to exert much less mental energy. They don't have to think much because the options are already there. They only have to pick one. While in open-ended question, they had to think of their answers, and they had to also think of how to actually articulate their answer, how to actually phrase their answers. So in that sense, it is less taxing for the respondents, and that is why the respondents would be more comfortable with answering these kind of closed-ended question in comparison to answering the open-ended questions. There are different types of closed-ended questions. One type is called the dichotomous. Dicho means two, and that is why dichotomous means where we have only two response categories: yes or no. These could be the response categories: agree, disagree, like, hate. So these could be the response categories. I'll give you an example. India is a superpower, agree or disagree. So you have been given only two response categories. That is why it is a dichotomous question, and the uh, it is basically a closed-ended question and a dichotomous question. On the other hand, if I give you more than two categories from which you will have to pick one and respond, then it will be a multiple choice kind of a question. So the question that has been shown here in the example that we took in this particular slide at the top, this is basically a multiple choice closed-ended question. Okay, so now I hope you are clear about the two types of response formats that we have, the open-ended ones, open-ended questions, and the closed-ended questions, and how they compare with each other. In our next video lecture, we'll be taking up the wording of the questionnaire and the actual design of the questionnaire. So kindly go through this video again, and please be sure about every single thing that we have discussed in this video. Thank you very much.